Session 2. Hey, look, in session 1, we kind of eased into this conversation, but we need to go a little deeper and get kind of even more serious here pretty quickly in session 2. Hey, let me remind you, a sacred marriage equips you to love your God more, helps you reflect the character of His Son more precisely, and demonstrates the fruit of the Spirit in your life. That's what we're doing this weekend, right? We're what?
Raising the bar.
We're raising the bar, the level of expectation we have on ourselves. The third factor, the flaw factor, it's not easy. Hey, I talk to college students a lot about dating and courtship. And I sometimes say, I think dating is a rather artificial environment for evaluating a relationship or a person. I mean, the real goal of dating is to discover and evaluate the standard of righteousness of another person. That's really what it's all about. And so dating is a rather artificial environment because we tend to put our best foot forward, don't we? And so there's a certain amount of unintentional deception, right? Because we're on good behavior. We're putting our best foot forward. And I've seen in some cases there's some intentional deception. You know what I mean by that? And so it could be that we failed to discover his or her less than best self. You know what I mean by less than best self? We all have it. We all have it, don't we? Matter of fact, I told you I texted Wanda this morning and I said, thank you for loving me, what? Warts and all. Let me take off the mask and be transparent with you for a moment. If you knew about me, what I know about me, you wouldn't come to this seminar. But if I knew about you what you know about you, we wouldn't let you in. So it's all the same. It's all the same. Right? We're a bunch of sinners saved by grace, right? We are incredibly flawed. And one of those things, your marriage is going to bump up against the flaw factor. It's not easy. A couple gets married, and about a year later, the groom goes to the preacher who did their wedding, and he was talking about how hard that first year of marriage was, and they had a conversation for a while, and then the young groom was leaving the meeting, and as he was leaving, the preacher says, hey, don't forget you took her for better or worse. And the young groom turned to the preacher and says, yes, I did, but she turned out to be worse than I took her to be. It's like, isn't it true? Your marriage soon encounters the flaw factor. It's not easy. And in fact, it's harder than you thought it would be. You vowed to love them unconditionally, but you don't know just how imperfect he or she is. In fact, you soon discover that marriage involves two imperfect people entering into a committed relationship, diligently pursuing intimacy under the rule of God. You see, Steve's is an imperfect love for Wanda, and Wanda's is an imperfect love for me. You discover that you have different sin natures, and that spiritual warfare, watch this, spiritual warfare began in the garden, and it's alive and well today. Hey, can I be serious about this? The flaw factor, the story of Eric and Angela. It's an article I have here, and Angela writes, I thought my marriage was solid and happy. Eric and I had been married a few years, and everything seemed to be going well for us. Then one day, completely unexpected, Eric confessed to me that he struggled with pornography for most of his life, including since we had been married. The feelings of shock and disbelief I had quickly turned to hurt and anger. How could he have done this to me? As the shock wore off, I carried feelings of numbness, hurt, anger, and shame all at the same time. I was a mess. But I was certain of one thing: nobody was going to find out about what had happened in our marriage. I was captive to worrying about what others would think of us. A couple of years went by, and I had managed my feelings by denying them. I hoped I could keep porn away from Eric and he away from porn if I prayed hard enough. Of course, it is always great to pray, but let's just say that I was using prayer as a Band-Aid to my own deep wounds. It wouldn't be until I found a recovery program that I started my own healing. Our marriage went on to have great healing as we both worked on recovery. God has a wonderful way of not wasting our hurts. Out of our mess, He gave us this ministry called Noble Choices. Hey, that's pretty serious, right? And quite frankly, I won't speak to the subject much here, but the issue is epidemic in our society. And I do mean epidemic in our society. You know, what would you say to this young couple? I remember this issue being called to a couple's apartment one time, and same story. What would you say? Well, before I tell you what I said to this young couple on that day, let me say this: that wives can be pretty hurtful too. We had some good friends of ours. Matter of fact, they double dated with Wanda and I. Ended up getting married before we did. And I watched them go on, this couple, and he was a good and godly man. And I watched them go on to have 2 daughters. And over the years, I watched the wife and 2 daughters actually ridicule him. Make him look he was indeed the butt of the joke. And I suggest to you, it was, to me, watching, it was very painful for him. These authors, O'Donnell and Morse, describe it this way: many men take injury upon injury from their wives and children and just hide the blood. They quickly cover the wounds from sight of others. But the painful injuries do not disappear simply because they are hidden. If anything, they fester and grow deeper as more jabs and punches are aimed at the unhealed wounds. Watch this. They go on to say, one man said that taking the role of spiritual leader for his wife equates for him with standing to speak in front of an audience with no pants on. Why? Because his wife knows all of his failures, all of his weaknesses, and as he said, seems to have a special gland that helps her recall these failures in an instant when I fail again. Hey, could I suggest to you that there are many men out there that believe at some time or another they tried to be vulnerable. They shared their heart, maybe with a spouse or women in general in some setting, and they paid a price for it. Perhaps they were ridiculed. Perhaps they were questioned. Perhaps in some way they looked small. And I suggest to you that man will think twice and a third time before he shares his heart again, if he pays a price with it. I also suggest to you that your children will most likely survive the well-intended blunders of your husband's parenting. But what they will not do well is with a father who backs away from parenting because he can't do it good enough to please you. You with me? And I even suggest that your marriage more than likely will survive your husband's well-intended blunders. But your marriage will not survive the husband who disengages from you because he can't do it good enough. Are you with me? They go on to say, let's see. Did I already do this? Yeah, I did that. Yeah, we did that. Yeah, here we go. We can see a part of us that can be easily crushed. And of all the people in this world, who knows better than a man's wife how to crush his ego? In fact, It's often a man's own wife whose arrows hold the most potent poison because she knows his biggest weaknesses and is close enough to take perfect aim. What am I saying to you? We hurt each other, don't we? One more. You hold the words of life for your husband, even if he seems nonchalant about your feelings, even if he doesn't seem concerned about your approval. He is. He just doesn't know how to admit it without feeling overly vulnerable. When we expect perfection out of marriage, we are setting ourselves up for disaster. Marriage means torturous work and a predictable routine. That's what you should expect. Indeed, successful marriage has little to do with sustained bliss and everything to do with surrendering to the grind. Hey, I hope that's a little bit of an overstatement, right? I hope it's not a grind, right? But I get the point the author is making. Yes, marriage can be hard. It's the flaw factor. It's not easy. So what do we do with when he or she is incredibly flawed? What's quality must we possess to grow together rather than our flaws being a wedge that drives us apart? Okay, here it is. You know it. It's forgiveness. The best marriages are made up of two good givers and two good what? Forgivers. To remodel or rebuild your marriage, you usually have to begin with what? Forgiveness, don't you? But let me ask you, how do you forgive when you've been hurt deeply? When you have been wounded? Perhaps you've been betrayed. How do you forgive? I like to ask it this way. How do you forgive the unforgivable? How do you love the unlovable? Let me share a thought with you. Have you given much thought to the idea that Jesus was crucified by those who were supposed to love him the most? Jesus was betrayed by his own people. We're going to say more about that tomorrow in our worship lesson. He was betrayed by his own people, the people who were supposed to love him the most. And to be honest with you, in an audience this size, some of you will experience your greatest hurt, wound, perhaps betrayal, will be from the one who should love you the most. It may be your spouse who nails you to a cross one day. How do you love the unlovable and forgive the unforgivable? I'm going to suggest to you that the way you do it is Luke 9:23. Then he said to them all, if anyone would come after me, he must deny himself, take up his cross daily, and follow me. In other words, it's saying if you are a disciple, then you take up a cross. Now, here's what I would suggest. I don't mind being a Christian. I just don't like being crucified. Isn't that true? We don't like being nailed to a cross, but this passage is saying, hey, you identify with the cross. Your identity is in the cross. And what did Jesus do when he was betrayed by his own people? He stretched forth his hands, and what did he say? Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. And for some of you, it may be that you have to look at your own spouse and say, Father, forgive them. They know not what they do. When you've been hurt deeply, when you've been betrayed. So what did I say when I walked into the room of this young couple whose marriage, watch this, had just come face to face with spiritual warfare, right? He was her knight in shining armor. And I say to you, he was and is a good and godly man. But their marriage came face to face with spiritual warfare. And so I walked in, and as I walked in, he began to sob. She began to cry. And I read this to them. Can I devote myself to a person who is far from perfect, but who wants to share a common life with me? Will I choose to love a person because he is perfect, or because he is through and through who he is? Real devotion begins the day I accept my husband as a wonderful, lovable sinner. That's why in my Bible I've got written in the margins, if God can save me by grace, I can live with Wanda by grace. If God can save Wanda by grace, she can live with Steve by grace. Look, did we have to deal with the sin? Yes. It would destroy their marriage. We're going to have to deal with the sin. But I suggest to you, pray for the ability to acknowledge our wrongs and to both ask for and extend forgiveness. Listen to me. Being created in God's image means you are an image bearer. You bear the image of God. You reflect the love of Jesus, Christ, in your life. So watch this. My son actually said this in a conversation day before yesterday. Your marriage should reenact and demonstrate the gospel message, watch this, of confession, repentance, and forgiveness in your life. Amen. Yes, your marriage lives out the gospel message of Christ. It's the flaw factor. It's not easy. You be encouraged. Forgive them, for they know not what they do. The second part of that, for the flaw factor, is the idea of commitment. Commitment. Have you ever heard of Sir Hernando Cortez? He led a Spanish expedition. I think it was to South America. He was looking for golden treasure. He had a fleet of like 5 Spanish ships, and they came on shore, and they were going to go into the interior and look for golden treasure. And I believe he knew that as they went into the interior, that some of his men would get malaria and die of sickness. I suspect he knew that they would get ambushed somewhere along the way, right? And so if you know the story, he gave an order for his men to unload all the supplies off the ship. And then, does anybody know his next command? Burn the ships. And he sent a very powerful message that we're not going to what? Yeah, we're not going to sail for home. If it gets hard, we're not going to sail for home, right? I would suggest to you that Cortez defined commitment this way. You limit your options. We're not sailing towards home. And you limit your options. So if I were to give you a marital example of that, it's like the young couple who got married. They said, we take each other for better or worse until death do us part. And the young groom went out the next day and bought 2 funeral plots and presented those to his wife as a very powerful message that I will never ever leave you. Whatever problems we have, we are going to work through them, but we are not sailing for home. You with me? That's commitment. And I think we live in a culture where commitments are weak on many fronts. And very weak commitments. How many of you remember Christopher Reeves? Christopher Reeves. Superman. I don't know if you know his story or not, but he had just kind of made it big in the movies. He was a star. And he was participating in an equestrian event. I think that's horses. And his horse Buck jumps, and as he comes over this jump, the horse stumbles, and Christopher Reeve, like 6'4" or 5", 235 pounds, physically fit. He says he goes over the horse, and his hands become tangled in the bridle, and he couldn't put out his hands to break his fall, and he landed on his head, and it broke severed a vertebrae at the base of his brain and stem. And he's in the hospital, and he's on one of those machines that's breathing for him. And he's thinking just how messed up his life is. And his wife, Dana, comes to him. And people would go and come, and his spirits would be up and down. Dana comes to him next to this machine, and watch this. Christopher Reeve mouthed the words, "Maybe we should let me go." Dana started crying. She said, I'm only going to tell you this one time. The decision is yours. The decision is yours. And then she said the words that saved my life. You're still you, and I love you. He said, I knew then we were going to be together for the long haul. We had become a family. Listen, when people commit that way, you don't want to leave. You don't want to leave. You're still you. And I love you. I'm hesitant to, and if you know the rest of their story, she was with him until he passed away. And then, quite ironical, 2 years later, she passed away of lung cancer, I believe, having never smoked. Wow, what a message about life. Hey, I'm hesitant to maybe share the next one with you. I thought about hiding this next slide. See the young man on the far left? He worked a Christmas tree farm. He would harvest Christmas trees, and the ones you can't send to market, he would put in a big pile, and ever so often you would have to burn the rejects, right? And he would take 2 containers with him. One had water and the one had gas. And he would start a fire to burn the reject trees, right? And sometimes the fire would get real big too fast. And so he would take his water and throw it and knock down the flames and such. And on this particular day, he's burning them, and the flames get up high, and he reaches back and grabs the container with water, and he mistakenly grabbed the gas container, and it exploded on him. His fiancée was studying to become a nurse, and that's their wedding day. He had lost his arms, his legs, and you see a ring hanging around. Now look, I don't even know if it's fair of me to use that as an illustration to you. But you know what she said to him? She said, you're still you, and I love you. And so during your most difficult of times, can you still see what attracted you to your mate? Could you still see the goodness that drew you to them at one time? Family solidarity takes hard work, much imagination, and constant self-criticism on the part of all the members. A successful marriage is not one in which 2 people beautifully matched find each other and get along happily ever after. It is, instead, a means by which persons who are sinful and contentious. Let me just pause. We got any sinful and contentious folks in here? Can I raise my, We're sinful and contentious, aren't we? People who are sinful and contentious are so caught by a dream bigger than themselves that they work throughout the years, in spite of repeated disappointment, to make the dream come true. Isn't that good? Hey, so what's the dream? Can I suggest to you that the dream is the making of a holy life together? Can I suggest to you that the dream is helping one another get to heaven? A greater commitment to being like Jesus, a commitment to less worldly goals, and a greater commitment to your family. A greater commitment to God's redemptive mission in the world. Could that be your dream? I suggest that God is far more concerned about your holiness than your happiness. We'll say more about that later. God is far more concerned with your child's holiness than their happiness. So the dream of making a holy life together kind of brings us to the change factor. That's just the way I am. I was doing some counseling at a church in Tallahassee, Florida, and I had a couple come to me, and this is session 1. She was making a request for change. She was asking him to be more affectionate towards her. We mentioned affection earlier, didn't we? And she was saying, would you be more affectionate towards me? Now, he was like 5'6" by 4'3". He looked like a prison guard, and in fact, he was one. He was, yes, pretty intimidating kind of guy, kind of a man's man look, And I will never forget his response to her. First of all, let me say this. Was she making a legitimate request? Yes, I think she was. Affection is a legitimate need in relationships. And she was asking for change. And he looks at her and he says, well, I'm not sure I understand the problem. I wasn't particularly affectionate before we got married. He says, you came from a family that was real affectionate. They're kind of touchy-feely kind of people. I came from a family that wasn't. My family was not very affectionate. And he said, I wasn't particularly affectionate before we got married. I haven't been particularly affectionate for 8 years of marriage. Let me pause right here. What kind of issue was it? Was it a knowledge issue or a heart issue? Heart issue. See, it wasn't a knowledge issue. He knew what she wanted and needed from him. It wasn't knowledge, like I'm not aware of your needs. He clearly understood. I wasn't particularly affectionate before we got married. It's been 8 years. I haven't been particularly affectionate to you. I'm not sure what the problem is now. And then here's the punchline. He literally looks at her, this is session 1, by the way, and says, that's just the way I am. I'm not very affectionate, and that's just the way I am. How about that? He's going to anchor down. Let me ask you, do we do that? Do you and I give our spouse sometimes the message, that's just the way I am? I tend to lean on men a good bit, and myself. Don't we do that? I hear folks say things like, hey, yeah, I'm not very good with communication skills. And Steve says, hey, I've got a good book. Won't you read? I don't like to read. You know what that is? That's just the way I am. Well, have you guys considered doing any counseling together? No, he's not going to go to counseling. I'm not about, you know what that is? That's just the way I am message. That's just the way I am. What would you say, session 1, when they present you with, that's just the way I am? I think this is what I said. At least I hope this is what I said. I think this is what I said. I looked at him and I said, don't give me that's just the way I am. As best I recall, God is the only I am. The rest of us are called to become something other than what we are. Can I say that a little more preachy? Don't give me that's just the way I am. God is the only I am. You and I are called to become something other than what we are. Amen? We have far too many bad marriages because one or both give the message, that's just the way I am. So what's the quality we pursue to resist the change factor? And I suggest to you, it's a willingness to be transformed. What's Scripture saying? Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you may prove what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of God. To be made new in the attitude of your minds, and to put on the new self, created to be like God, is true righteousness and holiness. God is all about molding us and shaping us if we are willing to be transformed. And my favorite passage on this is Malachi 3, 2 through 3. But who can endure the day of his coming? And who can stand when he appears? For he is like a refiner's fire and like a fuller's soap. He will sit as a refiner and purifier of silver, and he will purify the sons of Levi and refine them like gold and silver. And they will bring forth offerings in what? Righteousness to the Lord. This passage says God is a refining fire. He is a launderer's soap. How did they refine gold and silver? They put it in a crucible and they subjected it to intense heat. And what would happen? It would melt, and the impurities would do what? The impurities would come to the top, and they would skim off the impurities, and that's how they refined gold and silver. And this passage is saying your God is a refining fire. He is all about molding and shaping you that he might bring forth people of righteousness and holiness. Amen. If you're willing to be transformed. And I'm suggesting to you that marriage is one of God's crucibles. It's one of his crucibles. Now we're going to say more about this in session 4, I think it is. Session 4. We're going to look closely at this. So you come back after lunch, all right? So watch this. Search me, O God, and know my heart. Test me and know my thoughts. Point out anything in me that offends you, and lead me along the path of everlasting love. Can I change this a little bit? Can I edit God? Would that be okay? I don't think he would mind. Watch this. Point out anything in me that offends you. How about this? Point out anything in Steve that offends Wanda. Point out anything in me that offends my spouse. Are you with me? And then it goes on to say, I will give you a new heart and put a new spirit in you. I will remove from you your heart of stone and give you a heart of flesh. God is all about molding and shaping us and transforming us. Watch this. But the fruit of the Spirit is what? Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. And again, if you'll come back after lunch, we're going to show you how God uses the crucible to mold you and shape you. All right? So let's wrap up here. The state of marriage is one that requires more virtue and constancy than any other. In spite of the bitter nature of its juice, you may be able to draw and make the honey of what kind of life? Happy life? Holy life. God worked in my life to change attitudes of bitterness, embarrassment, and resentment into attitudes of grace, love, and hope. These new attitudes developed out of pain, self-sacrifice, and a little creativity. God accomplished this by walking with me through the hard times I longed to control, but I could not. So this week, I want you to do this. Yeah, there it is. Yeah. This week, I want you to do this. Have conversations this week regarding how you can make positive and specific changes in your own behavior, which would help the two of you have a relationship cast in holiness and righteousness. Hey, we caught up a little bit on our time. We are at 10:53. What is 15 plus? I used to be a CPA, but that's like, hey, how about, okay, 11:10. We'll give you a few minutes back. We'll just do Mac, 11:10, all right? 17 minutes. Hey, have a good break.